Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments on bicycle travel adventures. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/376, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 376th edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name is Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. On this edition, the remix is in the rearview mirror, but as always, I like to take a look back and discuss takeaways from every single bicycle adventure. On this edition, 10 takeaways for 10 years of the pod and the Oregon Coast remix. So these come in no particular order, and it's sort of an amalgamation of things I'm looking back on as I think about what a great adventure this was. I mean, I think first and foremost, I enjoyed the heck out of this trip. I think that the thing that probably stands out the most in some ways was that super weird, I don't know, indigestion / lack of hydration situation that hit that sort of threw a little bit of a monkey wrench in there. And that certainly is going to have a bit of a takeaway in here. But overall, what a really, really fun trip. And it was made extra special by the fact that, of course, Mysterious James joined me. And we got that little bit of bonus time at the end that you heard last week. So I just really enjoyed the heck out of the trip. But I always do. I feel like, have I ever had an Oregon Coast trip where I've been like, not so much, you know, maybe someday, but not this one. All right, first takeaway. Don't rush your tent setup. This may seem like a minor moment in the entire trip, but it was a good reminder. I had a rough night at Bastendorf Beach Campground. Now, that, of course, was the one that was the replacement for Sunset Bay. And that was because I was a little lackadaisical about my tent setup. Anytime you've got a tent with a rainfly and you feel like you're going to need the rainfly for any of the various reasons why you may want one, including, of course, rain, fog, privacy, things like that. I tend to put mine on because I prefer the privacy of having that on. I don't know why, but I feel really exposed when I have the tent fly on. On a trip like the Oregon Coast, I typically am not worried about rain, and only occasionally am I worried about fog. Well, at Bastendorf, I had gotten too complacent about the fog because we really hadn't had any. And then, of course, that night we got the fog, which hit the trees above me, which dripped on my tent. And because I just threw the tarp over it, the rainfly over it, and didn't really kind of cinch it down properly, the engineering of my particular tent, and most tents, I would say, fails at that point, you know, and that's something that is kind of worth doing maybe every time, because you just never know what's going to happen during the middle of the night. You never know if rain is going to come in a surprise way or something like that. Now, this was a little bit different because it was a combination of condensation and a bunch of different things. I've really never run into that with my Alps Zephyr mountaineering tent. Alps Mountaineering Zephyr 2 tent. There you go. So this was an unusual thing, but it's a reminder that, you know, if you don't set it up a 100% proper way, you're not going to get 100% of the benefits. So, you know, it worked out when I got out of the tent in the middle of the night. I think it was like 12:30 or something in the morning, staked it out. Everything was fine from that point on. But it is really disconcerting, and it gets in your head when any kind of moisture is in your tent, I find, at least. And I would not have been able to go back to sleep. Now, I was getting pelted on the head every 30 seconds with cold water. So that was another piece of it. But I do find that when my confidence in the tent ebbs, I don't feel as comfortable in my tent. It's really interesting how important shelter is psychologically for us. So don't rush your tent setup. That would be my first takeaway from all this. Second one, pretty clear, and we talked about this a lot. Every trip is unique. James and I talked about this all throughout, I think multiple times on and off mic, how much each of our trips on the Oregon coast differed from one another. I mentioned every time I rode the coast, I used a different bike or setup. So did James, actually. And that made the journey more memorable because everything has a different spin on the ball. How you're feeling, where you're going, where you're stopping. And sure, we have our regular stops, but I think the whole point of the remix was to really try to shake it up even more. And I think that made this trip even more memorable. Now, did I miss out? Did I miss the fact that I didn't go to Brewers on the Bay in Newport, for instance? Well, yeah, but I went to another rogue brewery as a replacement that was actually in town rather than south of town. So, I mean, you end up kind of finding your replacements. And I'm really glad, we ended up going to different spots. Bandon, for instance, going to Bandon Brewery was nice to have as a little bit of a shakeup. And I think that it's important that when you, like me, do certain rides every year or nearly every year, how important it is to kind of try to shake things up. I think I need to do that a little bit more on the C&O, quite frankly, because I have found that hitting the same routine of the C&O every single time doesn't make each trip as memorable as it should be. And so I think I'm going to take that lesson too. Next takeaway: the critical importance of food and hydration. I already talked a little bit about this. I discovered that my difficulties during the ride were probably due to dehydration, and that absolutely affected everything. I think that there were a couple of things that I did wrong. And when I say did wrong, I think I did as if I were still 10 years younger. And I think that my body is less receptive to the things that I used to do from a hydration and a feeding perspective. And I need to get used to my new body, for lack of a better way of putting it. So 2 things I did wrong: way too much caffeine at once. Slamming 2 Red Bulls, not recommended. I found that using caffeine is a really helpful thing, but I think that screwed things up for me in a big way. Caffeine can be an appetite suppressant, as I mentioned. It also can throw off your hydration in a way as well. Also, I think I was overdoing electrolytes. I think it was the combination of these things that really messed up my system. And when it's sort of like with the tent, when you feel like your system is off, your eating and drinking system is off, you lose your confidence too. And that really messed things up during that one day, especially as we were in Florence when I really needed to call it. And I'm glad I did, because I think that it ended up making the rest of the trip that much better. And I think that that's a really important thing. Focus on your food, focus on your hydration, and listen to your body, because even though you may want to stick to a schedule, you may want to keep going, if your body is telling you to stop, it's telling you to stop for a reason. And I think that my body was telling me. It was telling me in all sorts of different signals, including what the color of my pee was, for instance. There are signals that your body gives you. And, of course, when you go on these long trips, where you're putting your body through stress, your body's going to do a bunch of different things about retaining water and a whole bunch of other things, because it thinks your body is under assault when you do these types of things, especially if you're not doing this kind of activity on a more frequent basis. Calling myself even a weekend warrior is probably overstating things. I'm a bike adventure warrior, and then my levels drop like a rock. I don't put myself through anything near what I put myself through on these bike adventures. So that's something to pay attention to. Also, on the positive side of things, I found the frosted mini wheats trick was really, really helpful in maintaining my energy levels, especially when I was struggling to eat food. And I don't know if this came across quite right, but I was so uninterested in eating, I would have had to literally force myself to eat to be able to get food down. And that's a really uncomfortable place. When food was in me, it wasn't digesting. So something was critically off, and my body needed a good night's sleep and a reset and more water for it to get better. And it did within the next 24 hours. But in the interim there, I did need some calories, and, small bits of easily usable carbohydrates like those frosted mini wheats really ended up being a good choice for me. But it also was a good choice for me even when I wasn't struggling like that. So, we're always learning things about our bodies, and we're fine tuning what works best for us. Your mileage may vary completely. If you're a younger rider than me listening to this, you may be able to eat just whatever you want, and that's cool. I used to be able to do that, and now I'm discovering that, not so much. And, I got to make sure that I'm feeding the fuel in a proper way and also really paying attention to that hydration. I think that that's become more and more important for me as time has gone on. So just know that food and hydration is of critical importance. Next takeaway, I want to talk about the dual nature of the Oregon coast when it comes to weather. It was a blessing and a challenge, blessing and a curse, whatever you want to say. It was rewarding and a challenge. It was cool. The temperatures never really got much more out of the 60s than anything else, 60s Fahrenheit. So the temperature was great, but I will say, let's get back to our good old friend, my nemesis, and James's too, the direct sun. I have been noticing that the sun feels stronger on me during the summers in recent years. Is it in my head? Is this anecdotal? Maybe. But I find that the exposure to the sun really, really impacts me when it comes to any kind of physical activity. I mean, just walking around in the city, if I'm out and about on a really hot, sunny day, I am way more exhausted at the end of that day compared to similar type of exertion when there's even just clouds in the sky. It really makes a big difference. And I used to find that when I was on the Oregon coast, if I caught a sunny day, it was no big deal because it was so cool out. That's not the case anymore. I found that it was as challenging as a hot sunny day. And that's something to think about more when it comes to what I wear, how I approach things. Loose fitting long pants and long sleeves can be really helpful. Those sun sleeves can be really helpful, but keeping the sun off of you is such an important thing, regardless of where you're riding and regardless what the temperature is, because it is just it's an energy sapper. And of course, the impacts of the sun on your skin for extended periods of time. It's good to get a little bit of sun. I feel pretty confident in saying that. It's bad to get too much sun. And that is something that we struggle with on our bike adventures. So, the Oregon coast still is a fantastic place to bike in the summer. It's just, you can't ignore sun exposure as a part of it. So the weather is a dual role. And I will say, when it is cool or foggy or cloudy, I just love it. When James was describing further down the way, when he was going south of Crescent City up and through the hills, talking about how he hated the fog. And yeah, the fog in that instance was dangerous. All I could think of was, I wish I was riding in more fog, because I love it when the sun is occluded on a day. Yeah. And the temperatures are comfortable. It is just so nice. So the dual role of Oregon coast weather for that matter. Let's talk about companionship on the road. I am a long-time solo rider. The earliest lesson I had 12 years ago, I think now it is, was group rides just aren't for me. It's strange. I am about a 50-50 introvert extrovert. So I do like handling things with people. I like that. I like that. I like being in social situations. I do not like it when I'm riding, and I've tried it a few other times, and it's just not for me, which is a bummer, because I would really like to do more of that kind of thing, especially sort of like, the Friday night group rides and stuff like that. So I think I need to push my boundaries a little bit more on that. What I will say is that when I have been cycling with James, I have enjoyed rides way more often. I think that it comes across on the podcast too, just, as I was editing those episodes, what ordinarily would have been just, me doing little reports in camp were fun conversations. And I think that was probably more fun for you to listen to as well. Let me know either way. But I do think companionship on the road is a really good thing. And I think that part of the reason why it works for me and James is we just go way back. And that's a really helpful helpful thing for me. Not to say a lot, some of you have actually invited me to go riding and stuff, and I do intend to maybe want to take you all up on, and some of you up on that, I should say, not all of you, because if I did all of you, I would never have any time. And, it's something that I would like to do more frequently, but I am reluctant because I just know how my brain works. I don't ride with anyone, like next to someone, or have conversations as I ride. I find that really tricky, really difficult. And I think that that's been my biggest reason why I haven't taken people up on offers to get together and ride, because I'm bad at that. I'm really bad at it. I don't like talking when I ride. I like to kind of be in my own head a little bit. So the way James and I did it, or we've done it for years, is we ride separately but meet up, and that ends up being just the right thing for me. That said, I think I need to push my boundaries, and I would like to kind of change that over time. So if that all makes sense, that felt a little rambly because it's a little uncomfortable talking about that for me. I don't know why. All right, next takeaway. Campground upgrades. Man, we stayed at some really interesting places on this trip, all with different amenities. And of course, we did our ratings all through this, which I know was one of my goals for this year. And I'm glad that we really stuck with that. I think we rated a bunch of different things kind of randomly. We pre-graded things. It was kind of fun. I wouldn't say that any of the new ones were my favorites, but I would say the new hiker-biker at Jesse Honeyman State Park outside of Florence, what a huge upgrade that one was. I mean, now I'm very excited for staying there on future trips because the sites were just phenomenal, and that may just get better and better over time. The fact that Florence is pretty close to it gives you a lot of great options. So that one was I think the biggest surprise, because it wasn't on the list, but and that's kind of like the silver lining to the getting thrown off schedule, was to go there and to discover that and see how great it was. I thought that the campsite up in Lincoln City was also really good. Devil's Lake, the first one that we stayed at. I thought that the one that is a potential replacement for Sunset Bay was also a good one, Bastendorf. So, and of course, I really enjoyed the one in Bandon. That one was excellent too. So what I liked most about all of these was the fact that it was just fun to try new ones, but also to expand the possibilities for where I can go. And one thing that I'll mention about that is that gives me a little more, I don't know, confidence perhaps to do what James does, which is, he just kind of goes out and he rides and he looks at his ACA map and that Adventure Cycling Association map, and it lists all of these kind of like little ones that I always kept passing by, not thinking that there would be hiker bikers there or that they would be bicycle friendly. And he does a much better job at that. And that's, I think, something to think about. That might be another kind of twist on an Oregon ride, where it's just I start someplace and have no particular plan whatsoever and just go until I'm tired and just go with that. That might be a good way to do it. So the campground remix element was sort of the core of this ride, but I just thought it was fantastic. I also want to give a shout out to Oregon State Parks, because the upgrades and the amenities that they're putting in these places are fantastic. The fact that there's charging stations at so many of them. Interestingly, how some of them have 110 volt outlets and some of them don't. Some of them have the 5 volt USBs, but they're USB-A. So if you're moving to USB-C, you do have to have some extra flexibility. You do need to have your brick charger. You do need to have probably a USB-A to USB-C. And you need all of these things. You need to be ready for the possibility that you'll have to have a different charging cable, for instance, to be able to take advantage of all of these things. Do you need all of this? No, of course not. We used to charge things in bathrooms, for crying out loud. We bring battery banks, but it's just nice that it's one less thing to think about. And I know when we first started doing this 10 years ago, this was a major issue for me, at least. And now technology is getting better. The addressing of that technology is getting better. Just a shout out to Oregon State Parks for all of this. Next one, we got a few more, of course, is the value of good sleep. I think that the best thing that I did, and this is kind of a callback to the food and hydration issue, is when I was at Honeyman and I really needed to kind of have that reset, as we did the short day, that good night's sleep that I got at Honeyman was a critical part of helping me recover. And I think that that's something that we underestimate a lot in all of these bike adventures. And I think that also this is a nod to those of you who are not campers. And I think one of the reasons why you might not be a camper is because you don't get good sleep when you're on the road, when you're on these bike adventures. And I totally get that. There are some nights when I get kind of mediocre sleep, and I never really know why. I think some nights are just better than others, but that night I needed a good night's sleep and I got it, which was really good. So what do you need to get a good night's sleep? I'll use James as an example here because he has very specific needs when it comes to his sleep. He has 2 inflatable pillows, if memory serves, one that goes under his head and one that I think he puts under between his knees or something like that. But it's because he has very specific sleep needs, and you may have those as well. Think about what gives you a good night's sleep. I tend to run really warm when I sleep. So if I am in any kind of a situation where it's not going to be cool at night, I have to bring a fan with me, literally a battery operated or a rechargeable fan. And if I don't have that, I will not sleep, which is why you don't hear about too many tours in this area of the country on the East Coast during summers for me, because it's just really difficult for me to get a proper night's sleep. And that's really critically important. It helps you sort of recover and restore from the hard riding of the day and then gets you ready for the next day. And that clearly was important for me on this particular trip. And I'm really glad that I got a great night's sleep on Honeyman, because it made the difference between being able to continue and do what did I do, a 50 or a 60 mile day the next day. That didn't seem to be possible when we went in our tents that night. So good sleep is an important thing. We've got 2 more here. This one I think is a common one for all of my takeaways, and that's being adaptable to changing plans. I needed to adapt multiple times in all of this. I mean, when we, of course, called it short, we've already talked about that, and ended up staying at Honeyman, that was a really critical one. But also just, the fact that, I was dreading staying at Sunset Bay, as the punishments for my insolence. And we ended up finding Bastendorf, and, shout out to James for figuring that one out. And it was, again, it was also a nice way to continue the run. We stayed at new to us campsites every single time, in part because of that. I have to say, I am a little bit curious about Sunset Bay because, as I mentioned before, they said that was a temporary spot for the hiker biker. I don't believe it. I think that it's the permanent spot now. But I will say that I think that Bastendorf may be my new spot to stay for future sites. I don't think it's substantially better than Sunset Bay. I think it's just a little bit different, and the positives that it has outweigh some of the negatives of Sunset Bay. Sunset Bay is just a more picturesque place, and this is very basic, but and it's also up a big hill. That's another bummer. But it also, you don't pass the Seven Devils Road, which is, I don't know why, I hate backtracking. It's another thing I hate about Sunset Bay is I have to backtrack. Well, anyways, you could tell I went on a tangent because I brought up Sunset Bay, right? Being adaptable, changing your plans on the fly. I am on the record as a huge planner, but I also must be adaptable. And one of the reasons why I'm a big planner is because I know things will go sideways. And if I'm a good planner, I will know what my options are. And having options can improve your trip as far as I'm concerned. So be adaptable. Don't be so rigid about where you're going to stay. Unless, of course, you're kind of making a cold shot. A lot of you, again, will make reservations for hotels and other things. You got to get there. I mean, I get that. But, if you do have some flexibility, being adaptable, I think really makes a big difference for your overall trip. And my last takeaway, man, just maintain a positive attitude. We went through a few weird things, and it was all on me. And one of the things that I was concerned about was when I'm riding with someone, which doesn't happen often, the fact that I was really going to have to call a short day, I felt bad about that. That was calling a short day for James as well. And he had much more to go. I mean, luckily he wasn't on any kind of a schedule where, kind of shortening up his day there was going to create a problem. But it could have, and, that was imposed upon him. But we all just stayed positive about the whole thing. I mean, we joked about the situation more than anything else, on and off mic. And, I think that makes a huge difference. And I think that makes a huge difference in life too. When you go through challenging things in life and challenging situations, work, relationships, whatever, bicycle trips, it's good to try to just see the experience for what it is and do your best to say, all right, whatever this is, I'm going to get through it. And I'm going to be looking back on this and laugh a little bit for the negative things. I'll tell you, when I was feeling kind of gross and wasn't sure if I could keep going, I was for a bit down on myself because I was sort of like, I'm not in good enough shape. I didn't prepare for this right. This isn't going the way that I wanted it to. But I turned it around. I was like, you know what? We've got a campsite here. We're going to have a good night. I'm hanging out with my friend. These are all good things. And that really ended up being as much of a positive thing as anything else. So having a good attitude about things just makes life a lot better. And that's particularly true for a bicycle adventure. By the way, I was wrong. That was number 9. Or that was my 9th one, the last one. Number 10. This was part of the discussion in the final episode and a couple of times in other episodes too. Where are the cyclists on the Oregon coast? I am still pretty puzzled. James and I have kind of talked about it a little bit more off mic, and the lack of cyclist encounters on our rides. And by the way, this continued for him down the line in California too. We had our theories. We shared them. I think that those are valid. And I think none of them are particularly helpful in explaining why we saw no one. I don't know if there are just overall fewer people cycling. I don't know if we caught a dip in the number of cyclists. I'm sure Oregon State Parks knows whether or not there are the same fewer or more people cycling. It's just really interesting to me because when I first started this podcast, and I think James and I talked about this in our discussion that was on mic, it felt like that this was something that was just going to grow and grow and grow. And even during COVID, you may remember that there was a big uptick in people cycling. I thought that was going to translate over, but well, as with so many things in COVID, stuff got memory old real quick. And I think that cycling, well, it's back to being what it was. I don't think it kind of had the uptick that was part of my expectations. But it's so weird cycling and hitting these campgrounds and not running into anyone at all. And one other thing that I've thought about is just this was always something that had an age range to it. And the age range tended to skew to people who were sort of in retirement or near retirement ages, which I'm starting to get closer to. So I'm starting to hit that demographic. And then younger people, like folks in their late teens and early 20s. And I'm seeing, obviously, none of either. But I just wonder if the younger demographic just isn't doing this type of particular activity, which gets into James's theory about, are they hiking? Are they doing bike packing? Are they doing other things? There are outdoorsy people of that age range for sure. Some of you may be listening to this show, but I just wonder if the road cycling thing is starting to be taken off the table as kind of an interesting thing for a lot of people. And like I said, I kind of get that. I love it. I don't feel unsafe when I'm riding on 101 in Oregon or California or Washington State. I tend to find that it's fine, but I'm also sort of used to it and I've done a lot of it. So there are a lot of people that have had terrible experiences riding in and around cars and have justifiable fears of it. And I just wonder if people are saying, you know what? I like bicycling, adventuring, but I am uninterested in the risk that is involved with cycling on roads that are shared with motor vehicles. I get that. I totally get that. So that I think is ultimately maybe what is the final explanation for me. But here's my worry. My worry is this, is that if the numbers are coming down and if they are permanently coming down, what is going to happen to the Oregon state parks and the California state parks and Washington state parks and hiker-biker campsites? Now, the hiker stuff may be increasing, at least on this small data point. It seemed like there were way more hikers, so maybe they'll keep them around for hikers. But, if the bikers decrease, will these amenities be seen as being too much, or will they start to be removed, or will they not be expanded? I really hope that's not the case, because what Oregon is doing is just phenomenal. And maybe that's the kind of thing that is required to increase cyclists. If the idea is, well, I can't do it because I have no place to plug my phone in, well, now you do in a bunch of them. So maybe that's another answer there. I've been speculating wildly about all of this because this is just so puzzling to me. But also, why should it be? Things change, man. The world changes. Things don't stay static forever. So I like the fact that actually I can go to some of these places and there's not a ton of people. So I do get my solitude if I would like it. But I do remember back to those days when James and I were first cycling that section of the Pacific coast. And every night you met new people, and sometimes you cycled with them for a few days. And I have good solid memories from all of that. And maybe that's my extrovert side kind of getting in there and kind of wishing that we had that again. But I've had good experiences, and I think that there will be more. So I don't think this is a permanent condition, but it's something that I've been noticing the last couple of years. So we'll just have to see how it goes, and we'll continue to report on all of that. All right, so those are my 10 takeaways for the Oregon Coast Remix. What a great way to celebrate 10 years of the podcast. I just so enjoyed it, and I can't get over how much I love riding in that part of the country and in that part of the world. And I'm glad I get to share it with you. And hopefully having the remix element made this more interesting for you all too as listeners. So thanks for joining as always with all of that. Programming note. As we round the corner here into the fall, as you're listening to this, a few things. First and foremost, by the time you hear this, undoubtedly, I think Lael Collins will be done with her fabulous ride. I will know for the record how fast she did the West Coast. As I'm sitting here right now, Lael Collins basically went through Oregon in, I think, 2 days. It was stunning how fast she was able to do it. She does 200 miles a day. It's just wild to me as I'm like going, 60 miles, pretty big day. Now, she's not loaded down and she's a superhuman athlete and all that other kind of stuff, but just so interesting to kind of read and listen to the podcast and everything. And what a just joy it was to be able to experience her literally around the world ride, but particularly when she started riding in places that I'm really familiar with and how quickly she did them. It's just stunning. Lael Collins, I am a fan, big fan. I hope you got a chance to listen to her podcast. Just absolutely amazing. And it sounds like there's some kind of a documentary coming out of all of it. And her wife, Rue, was doing a lot of photography and filming. And it will be first in line for all of that. And if that goes into any film festivals, I will be showing up with ticket in hand to watch it because this just sounds like such a crazy great adventure. That's not really a programming note. It's just the section that I was in. But programming note for this particular podcast. Next week, we enter a brand new era in bicycle adventures for the Pedal Shift Project. Remember that e-bike project that I talked about those many months ago? Let's just say that things have escalated and you get to join me in the process. And that all begins next week. Also, just a little bit peeking ahead here. We've got 2, not 1, but 2 more bicycle adventures left this year alone. And I'm already, I would say 95 to 99% locked in for the winter trip in early 2025. So there's a ton of adventures coming your way. I don't know which one I'm more excited for. I'll have to be honest. As I'm sitting here recording, there are 3 that are upcoming and all 3 have me super excited. And I'm kind of like going back and forth between each of them in giddy anticipation for what they are. A couple of them are unusual. One of them is an expanded version of something that I've done before. And I I can't tell you how excited I am for these upcoming trips, and doubly excited that I get to share them with you all on the pod. So we've got great stuff for the rest of the year and into early next year at minimum. And looking ahead to 2025, I think that we got some potential for some really bigger than ever kind of trips and adventures. And that is what this show is all about. So thank you so much for joining. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one shot and annual options. If you're not into the small monthly thing, check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joaquin Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Hankel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zaranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Bigel, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Kropke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullough, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Lazuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponsella, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Sarus Faravar, John Gardner, Sam Scruggs, Dwight Pintinger, Connie Bowder, Rob Merrifield, and thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.